Hello and welcome to the Lopsided Crafter Loom Knitting channel. My name is Erica and I'm so glad you're here. If you are a returning viewer, hi. And if you're new here, welcome. Welcome to my little bit of chaos and lopsidedness. Today I have a tutorial for you for my brand new pattern, Double Trouble. I decided to call it Double Trouble because we have two different cuffs going on here. We have a little rolly cuff and we have our ribbed cuff. This is a pattern for cuff down. We are going to be doing a heel flap and gusset like heel, and then we are going to do a short row heel and the Kitchener cast off on the loom. The pattern is available on Etsy as well as Ravelry if you want to follow the PDF pattern. The sample that I do on the tutorial is for 64 pegs. I do include the numbers for the other sizes, but again, if you want to follow more closely, the pattern is available on Etsy and Ravelry. I am also going to, I have not done this in the past, but going forward, I am going to start including a code for Ravelry in the pattern. Because I know for me personally, I buy patterns on Etsy. I also buy patterns on Ravelry, but I like to have them all in one place. So I'm going to give you the option if you purchase the pattern on Etsy that you will be able to get a free copy of it over on Ravelry so that you'll be able to keep all of your patterns together. Now that free copy is still just yours. It's not, a copy that you can share with anybody. It just gives you the opportunity to be able to keep all your patterns in one place. Plus, if I ever do any updates or modifications to this pattern, say I add an additional rolly heel or an additional rolly cuff here, or I do a different toe or anything, any kind of modifications would be only put to the Ravelry pattern because Etsy doesn't allow us to do modifications. I would have to actually take the old pattern down and put the new pattern up, but it doesn't notify anybody that's purchased the pattern. So that's why I've decided that I'm going to go ahead and include, another reason why I decided I'm going to go ahead and include that code for Ravelry. So if I ever do any updates or modifications to the pattern, you will be notified on Ravelry and it allows you to update it from there. Here we go to the craft table so I can show you the actual way to make this sock. It is a very long tutorial. Take your time. This is not a marathon. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. You should know how to get a hold of me, Instagram, Facebook, all the things. I did forget to mention in the very beginning of the video when I was talking about things that you would need, you are also going to need a darning needle. So make sure that you have one of those available. And here we go. For this tutorial, you will need your loom, yarn for the main body of your sock, and or a contrasting color for the cuff and toe. You do not have to have the contrasting color. I'm just showing you the option with it. You are also going to need your loom hook, optional crochet hook, but the crochet hook does come in handy when we come to the heel and picking up stitches, a pair of scissors, light bulb stitch markers, or some other type of locking stitch marker. And then you will also need some way to mark off your loom. You may even want a sock ruler of some sort. And possibly a row counter. I always use some type of row counter with every project. For me personally, I always like to put some kind of special fun stitch marker on my beginning of round marker. So, not necessary, just something that I like. I am going to be showing you how to do this sock on a 64 peg loom. The PDF instructions also have 48 pegs, 56 pegs, and 72 pegs. If you are using the Flexi Loom, it does come in handy that you can kind of color coordinate what you need here. So looking at our loom, these stitches here are my instep. So this is going to be the front of the sock. All the magic is done on the back half. So let's talk about these stitch markers. I have my beginning of round marker, and then this would be my half marker, which means for the 64 peg loom, from this peg to this peg is 32 stitches. From this marker, which is 3, technically 2 back from our half point, is one of our heel markers, and this is the other. These are the second set of heel markers, and then from here and here is our toe. Okay, so what does that mean? Typically when you make a sock, you divide your loom in half. You will get your instep on the front half and your toe and heel on the second. To get down to these numbers, you would divide your second half by 3, and that would give you your area for your toe and your heel. But because this heel needs a little bit more depth, we actually have to change where we put the markers for the heel and the toe. So for a 64 peg loom, our heel is going to be 13 stitches instead of the 11 that we already have here for our toe. The easiest way to show you the difference is to give you the toe measurements first. These pegs right here are 11. Then I have 10 pegs here in the middle that will not be worked. And then from here to here is 11. But for the heel, we need a little bit more. So the heel, I have 13 from this marker to this peg, the peg right before the marker. This marked peg to this marked peg is 12. Then from the peg next to the marker to the next marked heel peg is 13. This is one of the reasons why I like to use the Flexi Loom, because I can kind of color coordinate what's going on. I automatically know that when I get around here that I'm onto either my heel or my toe. Since this particular sock is a cuff down sock, once I get the heel done on this loom, I would remove these markers because I don't need them anymore. I've already got these set up for the heel, or for the toe, I'm sorry. If you don't have one like that, say you have a KB his and her set or a Cindy Wood set or something like that. This is how I would set that loom up. I still have my pretty little stitch marker over here marking my beginning of round. And because these are all the same color, this yellow marker right here represents my half loom marker. So from this marked peg to my beginning of round marked peg is 32 stitches. For the heel, just like on the other loom, I have 13 from here. So from this green one to this green one, and this green one to this one. And then these here in the middle, these two orange ones, actually represent what I would do for the toe. So the green are for the heel, and the orange is for the toe. So that's just how you would set it up on a different loom if you did not have or don't like using the KB looms, the Flexi loom. Okay, we're going to start off by doing the chain cast on. And you want to start with your main color. I know that sounds a little backwards than normal when you're doing a different color heel, but we do want to start with the main color this time. With the chain cast on, you actually cast on in the opposite direction than you intend to knit. So if you knit this way, you will cast on this way. If you knit this way, then you will cast on this way. You want to make a slip knot. Give yourself a little bit of a tail so that you can weave it in at the end. Okay, here we go. You're going to pull this loop out a little bit. Typically, you would put your slip knot on the actual peg. But with this particular cast on, we don't do that. We are going to put that loop directly behind our first peg. See how it's kind of moving there? We want our tail to be to the inside of our work. And the working yarn is coming around the other side of that peg. It's a little fidgety when you, for the first one, but it does go a lot smoother. So you're going to put your fingers through that slip knot and you're going to grab that tail and you're going to pull it through. At the same time, you kind of want to hold your tail, this first one, because if you don't, it's going to flip around and the stitch is going to end up being on the back, and we don't want that. So just grab, kind of hold on to that tail and pull that working yarn through. You see how it flipped around? We don't want it to look like that. We want it to look like this. So just grab that tail and kind of pull it back towards the back. You want one strand here on the front. All right. From now, it gets a little bit easier. You're going to take that loop. You're going to go behind your next peg, grab your working yarn, and pull it through. And it's going to loosen up a little bit as you're pulling your working yarn back down, but you can still pull on that loop to tighten it up. The loop is going to get bigger and bigger with each stitch that you pull through. So just pull your working yarn back to make it more manageable before you put it around your next peg. And you're going to do this all the way around the loom, the same manner. Loop behind the peg, working yarn through the loop all the way around. And then I'll show you what to do on the other side. Once you get back around to the other side, put that loop around that last peg. Just like we've been doing. And then simply take your loop and put it on the very first peg that we cast it on. And just pull it tight. Not taut, I mean, not like, don't strangle it, but, you know, pull the slack out. This is why you want to cast on in the opposite direction than you're working, because now your working yarn is set up to go in the correct direction. You could do this or even this, but it's going to make that first stitch right there look funky. So you really want to cast on in the opposite direction than you're going to work. So from here, we're set up, we're casted on, and now we're going to start the sock. And we are going to reset our row counter here. And we are going to start with our cuff. And we are going to knit 10 rows, just plain knitting. No ribbing or anything, just plain knitting. For me, when I use the row counter, I actually like to put it on the row that I am working on. So I know I'm going to be on row 1. Some people like to do it the opposite way, where they would only push the button once they've finished a round. Doesn't matter which way you do it. Neither way is right or wrong. Just make sure that you're consistent throughout your project. So that way you end up with the right amount of rounds at the end. So from here, we are just simply going to knit. I'm assuming that you already know how to do the knit stitch. If you don't, I do have other tutorials here on the channel with explaining the knit stitch and some more beginner friendly sock patterns. If you want to jump over there and look at those. So we are simply just going to knit all the way around our loom. For 10 rounds. When you get back over here and you see these 2 loops, just think of those 2 loops as one stitch. And you're just simply going to knit those off together as one. So knit all the way around. Like so. And this beginning instructions for the cuff is for all sizes. The only difference would be if you wanted the second part of your cuff to be, the ribbed part to be longer or shorter. But there's no size specific numbers for the cuff. Okay, go ahead and do this part of your cuff for 10 rounds, and then I'll meet you back. Once you've completed your 10 rounds, you should have something that kind of looks like this. You're going to want to push all of these stitches down to the bottom of your pegs so that they are out of the way for the second part of our cuff. Just push them all the way down. Okay. You want to make sure that your working yarn is coming out to the outside of your loom, because we're going to pick this back up later. Your tail can still be to the inside, but your working yarn needs to come to the outside. Now we are going to pick up our contrasting yarn. If you are using the same color for your second part of your cuff, you're still going to need to do this separately. So you will leave your main yarn still attached, and then you would just attach the same color. Maybe you've broken the ball up into 2 balls or something to that effect. Or if you are pulling your yarn from the inside of the ball, then this part you can use the outside of the ball, or vice versa. But you definitely want to keep these two things separate. With your cuff 2 yarn, we're going to do the same exact thing. We're going to make us a slip knot. We're going to go over here to peg 1, put our slip knot behind it, and do the chain cast on the same exact way that we did earlier. And we're just going to cast on right above those stitches that are already on the loom. Just like we did previously. Loop behind the peg. Pull that working yarn tail. Make sure that you don't get your other yarn hooked in there with it. Just kind of hold it off to the side till you get around the loom here where it's not in your way. We're just going to do the same thing all the way around the loom. So we're going to have our lower cuff, and now we're starting our upper cuff. So go ahead, cast that on, and put that loop back on that first peg. Okay, we're back over here to the other side. Put that loop around that last peg here and pop that loop onto the first one that I cast it on. Okay, there's one thing that I want to note here. If you start your cast on from the peg after your beginning of round, then on this next round, you can just simply do the knit 2, purl 2. If you cast on where your first peg is your beginning of round peg, for the first round, you are just going to skip this stitch, this peg altogether. That is not noted in the pattern, so just keep that in mind. If you start on this peg for the cast on, for the rib, this first stitch is skipped. Okay, so now that we are casted on, we are going to start the rib. Typically on the needles, I would do 20 rounds of the knit to purl to rib, but I feel like 25 on the loom gives a little bit longer of a cuff. The 25 rounds on the loom looks comparable to 20 rounds on the needles. So I just like to do 25. I think 20 is just not enough of a cuff support on the loom, but that's just my opinion. If you want to do 20, that's fine. Again, you know, there's no wrong way or right way. So we are going to reset our stitch row counter here, and we are going to do 25 rounds of knit 2, purl 2 with our contrasting color only. Again, we're going to skip this first peg if you casted on starting with this peg. If you started with the last peg of the round, then you will knit that first peg. So we are going to do our stitch repeat here. This first one is going to be a knit. And then we're going to do 2 purls. Being careful not to grab that stitch from our first color. I'll give you a little bit of a trick here how I know where I'm at. I know that there are 4 stitches in the repeat, knit 2, purl 2. I also know that knit 2 is 1, 2, and the 2 purls is 3, 4. So I do, whenever I'm doing a rib, I'll do 1, 2, 3, 4. For me, it is easier for me to keep track of where I am by counting it 1, 2, 3, 4 versus knit, knit, purl, purl. Again, do what's more comfortable for you and what way you are going to understand. I mean, you could even put stitch markers, extra stitch markers on the loom to mark off the knits and purls if that works for you. So we're going to do knit 2, purl 2. Knit 2, purl 2. All the way around. When you get back over here to this other side, and just like we did previously, when you start your next round, just treat those 2 loops right there as one. We are going to do that rib stitch for 25 rounds. And when you get done with that, I'll meet you back and I'll show you how to join them. Okay, once you have your cuff done, you should have something that looks like this. You have your rib on the top and your other little rolled cuff here on the bottom. We're going to go ahead and cut the yarn from our ribbing. Leave yourself a good tail so that you can secure it later. Just give it a little snippy there and set that yarn off to the side. Now what you want to do is bring these stitches back up. We want all of them up here at the top of the pegs so that it's easier to do the next step. Just bring all of those down, or up if you didn't turn your loom upside down like I did. I find it's easier to turn the loom upside down and bring the stitches down than to keep it the other direction. But like I've said in the past, there's no right way or wrong way, whichever way is more comfortable for you. So now that they're all up here to the top, make sure that working or the tail from your cuff is to the back. We're going to bring this working yarn back to the front. Now, what I want you to do to kind of lock and secure this is I just want you to lay that tail over the top of your new color. So when you do your next stitch, that's going to kind of lock in, okay? Just kind of set that back there in the middle, out of your way. This next step, again, is not size specific. This is for every size. We are simply going to knit these stitches off, treating both loops that are on the pegs as one. So we're going to knit those off all the way around. And this is going to be round one of your leg. Just simply knit them all the way around. And what this is doing is it's securing both of your cuffs together. So you have your bottom cuff, if you will, which is the rolled cuff, and this top cuff is your ribbing. Once you have finished that round one of the leg, your cuff is now secured to each other. So you have your little ribby and your little rolly. We're going to finish doing the leg. This is a shorty sock, so we're just going to knit in the round 11 more times for a total of 12 rounds for the leg. Now that we have our leg done, we are going to start our heel, flap, and gusset like heel. We can't truly call this a heel, flap, and gusset because of the way that it is shaped. When you drew a true heel, flap, and gusset, this area right here is considered the gusset. And so you will have a bunch more stitches here. And the only way to truly do that on the loom is to use a type of loom like this one, like the Flexi Loom, and expand. Because when you do it on the needles, the heel, flap, and gusset become the same amount of stitches as you originally cast on. So for example, if you casted on 64 stitches onto your needle, then once you've done your heel flap and you pick up the sides on each side of that flap, you will have an additional 64 stitches on the loom. And then you decrease down, creating that gusset back to your original 32. So this is really considered a heel flap gusset like. It does give you the flap and it does give you a wider heel turn. And this particular type of heel actually sits back further on your heel. Like on a normal short row type heel, it's kind of sitting up more in line with your ankle bone. But this type of sock actually sits on the back of your heel. So it gives you a little bit more support. But as I said, we're really not doing a true heel flap and gusset because we're not actually doing all of those increases and decreases. to create that extra fabric, but this still does give you a little bit more stretch, especially if you have a higher arch. So let's get started on our heel. Now our heel is size specific, so refer to those numbers that I gave you in the chart in the beginning and or the chart on the PDF, and let's get going. So for part 1, we are going to knit across our instep so that we can get back over here to our heel marker. So knit across your instep to the peg before your heel marker. So this one right here. And then we will start row 1 because now we're working in rows of our heel. Okay, once you are back over here to the peg before your first marked heel, I want to talk about this just a little bit more. So from here to here on this side, and from here to here on this side, these are considered your gusset stitches for the heel. And this will be your heel turn area. So you have your gussets on both sides and your heel. For the flap, you are going to knit back and forth. The first time, we are not going, so for the first row, we are not going to skip our first stitch because we are actually technically continuing in the round, and we're going to knit all the way back over here to the peg before our marked stitch. And then we're going to do what is called a turn knit or a U-knit, so that way we have our yarn set up to go in the opposite direction. So go ahead and knit all the way over to the peg before your last heel marker, and I'll show you what to do next. Okay, so we're back over here to the other side, and we're going to do this turn knit a little different than we typically would. Normally what we would do is bring our yarn around the front, so that way it is set up for our next stitch. If you do it that way, those side stitches are too loose and you have the chance of holes on your sock. So we're going to do it a little bit of a different way. Instead of going around the back to the front, we're going to come around the front to the back, almost creating an figure 8, and we're going to knit that stitch. Now, when you go to your next stitch, I want you to hold that yarn tight and then knit that next stitch off. And that just kind of secures and keeps that side stitch tension a little tighter. From here, this is also size specific. You are going to knit your heel flap, which is all of your stitches from your side stitch marker over here, your heel marker, all the way over to here. You are going to skip your first stitch because you turned it, and you're going to knit across. You're going to turn it this one, and then you're going to skip this one on the next row and knit across. You want to knit the amount of rows that are equal to 2 times plus 2 your gusset stitches. So for example, my gusset stitches for this sock on a 64 peg loom are 13. So 13 and 13 is 26, plus 2 more is 28. So I am going to knit 28 rows back and forth total the first one that you went from here to here, that is considered row 1. So you're going to knit the 28 total for the heel flap. The reason why you are doing it double and you are skipping that first stitch is because it gives you, by skipping the first stitch, even though you are knitting double, you're still only going to have that one stitch here on the side to pick up. And by doing extra, that gives you the opportunity to put one extra on the end over here and one extra over here to create less holes. But we'll get to that part later. Just knit your heel flap, the amount of pegs double plus 2, and then we will do the magic of the heel turn. Okay, once you have finished the flap, you should have something that kind of looks like this. You've got all these stitches over here that aren't on any of the pegs on both sides. That concludes part 1 of the heel process. Now we're going to move to part 2. And we are going to knit over a specified amount of stitches. They are in the PDF, and I will flash them here real quickly for you to see. For my size, I am going to be knitting across 23 stitches. So I'm skipping my first stitch, and then I'm going to knit 23. 1, 2, 3. So depending on your size, that should put you at the peg before your stitch marker. So basically our heel turn is going to be worked from this peg to this peg. So now that we've done that, now we need to put all of our gusset stitches. Now remember that I said our side stitches from this peg to our marked peg, and from this peg to this marked peg are all considered our gusset stitches. So this is where the locking stitch markers come in. We need to pick up all of those gusset stitches and put them on stitch markers. So I usually start over here with this last stitch. You want to make sure that you're going through the whole loop. Like don't split it, because it's harder to get back on the loom later if you have split any of the strands. So you're just simply going to put a locking stitch marker around that stitch. You're going to do all of them from this stitch marker to the peg before your next stitch marker. And then on the other side, from that stitch marker to the peg before this one. So go ahead and put all of those stitches onto a locking stitch marker, or you could also use a cable needle. I just find it's a little bit more control if I use the stitch markers. Okay, once you have picked up your gusset stitches onto stitch markers on both sides, you'll have something that kind of looks like this. Now what I want you to do is simply take those stitches off of the loom. You may have to work this last one here a little bit because that one is our edge one and it's a little tighter. But you're just going to pop all of those stitches off, and that's why we're using the stitch markers, because it keeps those stitches live so that we can decrease on our heel turn here. So all of our stitch markers are now just kind of hanging out. Okay. And we are, your beginning of round marker is probably going to fall off. So because you don't have a stitch to hold it down. So just kind of try to remember where your beginning of round marker is. I know that it is 2 over from this one. Okay, so we've pulled all of our stitch markers off. We're now going to just go ahead and turn knit this last stitch, this last peg over here. So that way we're ready to go back in this other direction. Sometimes these guys like to get in the way. Just work around them the best that you can. We're still going to, do our turn knit the same way that I showed you in the figure 8 style. It just helps give that a nice clean edge. So now what we're going to do is knit across our heel stitches. We're going to knit to one before the very last. All the way across that heel area to the other side. Okay, when we get over here, we're going to find that very first stitch marker that's in line. Now, sometimes they will bind each other up. You'll think you'll be pulling the right one and you're actually not. So just, be mindful of that. Look for your next stitch. And when you pick it up, you want to make sure that it is going in the direction that it should, meaning you don't want to pick the stitch up and twist it and put it on backwards. You want to make sure that it is going in the correct direction. And you are simply going to put that stitch on that last peg. Go ahead and take that stitch marker out and then do your turn knit. And now you're going to do the same thing back over this way. You're going to knit to the peg before the last one. You're going to pick up a stitch, put it on here, turn knit that off. And you're going to do that until you have picked up all of your gusset stitches. And that makes a very nice heel turn decrease. So go ahead and do that. And then I will show you how to do part 3 of the heel. Okay, you've picked up all of your stitches from the gusset and you have knitted them off. What that leaves you is this nice little heel cup here. And if you turn your loom over slightly, it leaves you this nice, pretty edge. I don't want to turn it over like really far because I don't want the rest of the stitch markers to fall off. But by taking those gusset stitches off and then putting it back on that last peg and knitting them together, that gives you that nice clean edge. So now we are on to step 3 and the final part of the heel. You can do this in a couple ways. You can pick up the stitches with your loom hook, with a stitch marker, by putting a locking stitch marker through those stitches and putting them back on the peg, or with a crochet hook. I find it's easiest to do with a crochet hook. This is a 2mm crochet hook. This is one that I keep with my knitting bag because it is comparable to the size of the yarn. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for that very next V. So I can see that my yarn's coming through here. Right? So my very next V is actually kind of hidden. It is right here. You would think that it's this one, but it's actually right here. I'm just going to put that crochet hook through there, and I'm going to yarn over, pull that yarn through, and just put it on the peg. Making sure that you don't twist that stitch as you do it. Sometimes it's just easier to do it with your fingers to go ahead and get it on that peg. You're just going to pull it down a little bit. Don't worry about tightening it up right away. We're going to go back and take the slack out of that once we get them all picked up. We're going to go back through our next V, yarn over, pull that through. If I can do it without my cat jumping on my lap. Pop it on the peg. Go ahead and do that all the way across. If your beginning of round marker fell off like mine, go ahead and make sure that you put it back on. And because this is the final step of the heel, you can go ahead and remove your heel markers because you won't need those for the toe. Go ahead and pick up this side and I'll show you what to do next. Okay, I told you in the beginning that you would have one extra stitch to pick up here at the end. Go ahead and pick that stitch up the same way that you've done your other ones. And just pop that onto that last peg. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go back over here and reduce this slack. Typically you would go at the end of the round, but because this from here to here is part of our heel shaping, we don't want to go all the way over here because we've went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So we're just actually going to start right here at this last peg. Put your loom hook in there and just kind of pull it taut. I like to hold my finger behind the peg and my thumb on top of it for more control. By doing that, I am allowing the yarn to move, but not as tight as it would want to because I'm holding that stitch there. And by holding my thumb on top of the next peg, or on top of that peg rather, I am controlling what that peg does. It doesn't flex or anything like that. So see all this extra yarn that's coming back out? We definitely don't want to leave that there because that will give us some major holes here on the side. And I dropped a stitch there. There he is. All right. So we're just going to keep pulling those down. And once we get over here to the other side, and we've reduced the slack, this is actually the slack from picking the stitches up. Okay, so that yarn split right there. It did not want to cooperate. There we go. All right, so I'm back over here. I still have a couple more. Pull that one down. Pull the next one down. Typically, when you have two left, you can just grab that working yarn tail and pull, but this is still kind of somewhat tight, so I am going to go ahead and just pull the yarn out like I've been doing. Oh, sorry for hitting the camera there. There we go. All right. Now that is from picking it up. But for good measure, I'm going to go back and do it one more time. Just to make sure. See, we still have a little bit more slack there that's still coming out. That's why I like to go back and double check, because sometimes it does take the 2 times to really get those stitches down to where they need to be. And do this way so we get that stitch marker. Just really pull it taut. Like, don't strangle it, but pull it taut, because we don't want any slack left there. Okay, so we have our first side picked up. Now we're going to knit across our instep. And when we get to the other side, we are going to pick these stitches up. So knit across your instep, and I'll meet you right back. Okay, I'm back here to the other side. I forgot to mention on the other side that if you use your loom hook to pick up these stitches, you're going to have to pick them up, put them on the loom, and then come back and knit. But by doing it with the crochet hook, we are actually picking up the stitch and essentially knitting it at the same time. I'm going to go ahead and remove that other heel marker because I don't need it anymore. And I'm just going to simply pick up those stitches. So this first one is actually right here. See the little purple guy? This is like a long ladder. We're going to do something with that in a second. We're going to pick this up right here. It doesn't matter what end you put that extra loop on. You can do it on the same side that you did over here. So if you want your double loop over here, then go ahead and when you pick up that next stitch, go ahead and put it on the last peg as well, so you have 2 there. So what that did was it kind of closed that little area off. But sometimes it still wants to leave like a little gap. So what I do on this other side is I kind of roll the loom over. And here's that extra little bit of yarn. Here's the first one that we picked up. And then we have that little extra bit of yarn. And I just like to pick that up. Just that one strand. See that extra bit right there? Make sure you get all your strands. And I'm just going to pop that on that peg before. So this is where we picked up and knitted, and this is the last peg that we knitted in the instep. So I'm just going to put it right there. And what that does is it takes that ladder away that was created from these 2 stitches when we did our flap, and helps to eliminate any type of hole that we might get. So now we're just going to go back like we did and pick up the rest of these stitches. And I will see you back in a minute. Okay, we've got these all picked up. Now we're going to start from this side to tighten those down. Now remember that the bottom loop was our first one, and this top loop was our second one. So we're going to pull on those, and then pull those all the way across, pulling out that tension or that slack, so that our stitches are nice and uniform all the way around the loom. Few more here. My working yarn. I'm just going to kind of hold on to that right there. All right, now I'm going to pull that tight. And I'm going to look down. See, it's still kind of loose. It looks okay over here, but these three are definitely loose. So I'm going to pull that tension a little bit tighter there. Definitely don't want any holes. I mean, you can always go back with scrap yarn and around that seam and seam it down a little bit more if we need to. Okay, so now we have them all picked up. And now what I want you to do is just kind of look. Do you see anything that might cause a gap or a hole? Okay, right here, you see how this ladder looks different than all the other ladders? And the same with this one on this side. So what we're going to do, let me turn this around so you can see it from this angle. This ladder right here that is between our heel and our gusset here, we're just going to pick one of those stitches up. Like so. And we are going to put it on this peg right here. But for me, it's easier to do it this direction, but I wanted to be able to show you what that stitch actually looked like. So I'm going to pick that stitch up and I am going to pop it onto that last peg of the heel turn, because that is also going to give me a little less of a hole. You see how it kind of closed that gap? This stitch is loose because it's connected to the working yarn. We're going to do the same thing over here on this side. We're going to pick this stitch up and we're going to pop it here on that peg. Pick that stitch up and put it here on this last peg. Pick her up and put her on. It's going to be tight, but we want to get that on there. When you come around to that area, you just treat both of those stitches as one. Okay, now we are going to knit back to the peg before our beginning of round marker. If you haven't already done so, go ahead and remove the heel markers that were left on the loom. If you're still with me, congratulations, you have knitted a heel flap and gusset. Remember me saying at the beginning of the video that this heel actually sits more on the back of your heel versus short row heels sitting on the side of your heel. So you probably are going to have to knit some extra rounds than you normally would. I typically knit 60 rounds for my sock, for my foot. For this particular one, I have to do 65. This concludes part 1 of our double trouble sock tutorial. We will work the foot, the toe, and the Kitchener cast off in part 2. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, stay happy, stay cozy, and may all your socks find their matches.